Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. Thank you so much for joining today. Today is a very special day. Well, this whole month, July, one of the things that July is known for is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I thought, given this focus, that it would be very important for us to turn our lens onto a topic of tremendous importance to all of us, our mental health. So just think back on all the things that we've been going through. We are still, to my thinking, on the heels of the pandemic. We happen to be in the midst for many, of economic uncertainty. For sure, there's political divisiveness and, sadly, oppressive heat. And so because of these things, and perhaps more, many people are on edge. And we know that stress can kill our dreams. So I have invited a guest to help us navigate our mental health and understand how we can take care of ourselves now and always. She is Jeanni L. Johnson, a board-certified licensed clinical social worker in Minnesota and New York, and she's now based in Westchester, New York. She holds a Master of Science in Advanced Clinical Social Work Practice from Columbia University and is the CEO and founder of For Love Psych, LLC, a business that is dedicated to destigmatizing mental health through accessible clinical interventions. So for more than a decade, Jeanni has focused on mental health and addictive disorders, supported by collaborative research at the Nathan S. Klein Institute for Psychiatric Research. She specializes in anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. And she's got a lot of degrees, but let's just say this. Her career is driven by a belief in collaborative healing and non-judgmental care, aiming to empower individuals on their mental health journey. So I brought her here to talk to us about all things mental health to help us navigate this moment in our lives. Please join me in welcoming Jeanni Johnson now. Hi, welcome. And thank you so much for being here. You know, as I said, there are so many issues in this exact moment that are stressing people out. And I believe that if you are experiencing a lot of stress, it's very hard for you to focus on your dreams because you're just trying to live day to day. Can you tell us the impact that stress has on the body, mind, and creativity?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, stress has a highly negative impact on the body, the mind, all aspects of self. Impact in that many people who experience high degrees of stress have higher incidences of diagnosed anxiety, depression, issues with sleep, problems with appetite, whether that be undereating, overeating at times. Generally, some type of disordered eating can happen in the context of stress. People are often more isolated as well when they're stressed out. They feel, being around others isn't a good thing, isn't a helpful thing. So it can really have a high degree of negative impact on someone's life if they are dealing with high levels of stress.
And so what can people do if they are feeling, they feel stress? I mean, we all feel stress at some point, but okay, I recognize I'm feeling it. What do I do about it? What can I do today if I'm feeling like, oh my God, you talk about sleep. I can't go to sleep. I got to come home after working however many hours and do A, B, C, D, and E. I got to take care of my kids. I got to, the list, whatever was on your list. And even talking about it, you get revved up, like how I'm sounding right now. When you get revved up because of all these things, then what? What can I do to stop it if I'm in that swirl?
Absolutely. Well, people in this world don't want to slow down, right? Many times the thought is, I've got 20 things to do and I got to turn it up a notch. So I'm going to say the uncomfortable thing, which is that if you want to decrease stress, you generally have to slow things down. So it's important to monitor your breath. Many people are going through the world and the tiniest thing related to the body is that you must be breathing. So taking a breath in, slowing things down, monitoring that when you're speaking, when you're moving, when you're eating, that you're actually breathing. It's also important
to... Jeanni, wait, let's stop for a second because that one, I tell that to my clients all the time. Yeah. Because I teach public speaking, and one of the things that I notice It's almost like a yawn. If you yawn, everybody else yawns. If you
Mhm.
hold your breath while you're talking, everybody else, your whole audience is holding their breath because the breath is powerful like that.
It
And
is. It
so
is.
when we are feeling stressed, when we're feeling nervous, all those feelings that can come when we're put on the spot, when we feel like it's a really important moment, when we hold our breath, when you notice that you're holding your breath, sometimes it's literally hard to decide to breathe. So what do you tell your mind in order to change that really unhealthy behavior?
Absolutely. Well, first off, you tell yourself, I'm taking a minute, I'm taking an instance, this time is for me. I often encourage my patients or clients to have some type of a mantra in mind. So something to the degree of, when the going gets tough, the tough get going kind of a situation, but maybe a little bit more compassionate, something to the degree of, I deserve a minute, I'm going to take a minute. A break is good for everyone. Anyone can take a break. Here's mine. So when you find yourself inclined to be moving, going, not taking in your breath, sometimes you really do have to say to yourself, here's my mantra, and it's going to snap me into place in some ways to remind me, what's important, which is that I feel well as I do the work that needs to be done.
And so, continuing along those lines, I think of the kinds of things that people talk about as being triggers. So something's going on in a relationship, and that person is pushing my buttons, and I just feel like I have to fight back, whether it's verbal fighting or sometimes it's even more than verbal. Can taking a breath turn the page? Is it powerful enough for that to have an impact?
Many times taking a breath can turn the page because you have a moment to reflect. Oftentimes, it's just like you said, people, when they are confronted by their partners or confronted in a situation, they often are looking to defend, right? They're like, oh, no, no, no. I got to defend myself against this. Like they're wrong, or they're coming at me and they're trying to do something to hurt me in some way or to push my buttons, like you said, on purpose, right? It's never that you're just triggered because, there's something
Right.
inside you that's inherently triggered,
It's
right?
always someone else's fault.
It's always someone else, right? They're trying to get to me, right? They're trying to pick at me and I don't like it. And when you jump right in and you don't pause, we come with that defensiveness, we come with that guardedness, and we often come off a little sharp too. So when you take a little breath, you take a break, oftentimes the mind has some time to catch up. It has some time to remember, hey, that my partner's actually, they've been on my side for 10, 15 years. Like I think, in this moment, maybe they're not trying to hurt me. Maybe they're trying to verbalize a need. And the way they're doing that just it doesn't have a good sort of framework. It doesn't have a good method. And so if I take that breath, maybe I can understand that a little bit better and maybe respond better so then they can respond better.
So that's very helpful. Here's another question or experience that many people are having right now. I mentioned it in the intro, and it is the weather. So I really want to address this because we see on the news, these crazy weather alerts. Your electricity might blow, so don't use too many devices. Whatever those things are, there are many alerts that people have been getting all over the United States in the past 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And also, tensions are much higher in moments of extreme weather. So what can you recommend to people to just tend to themselves during this time that we don't know when it's going to let up? And yet we don't want to have flare-ups, emotional flare-ups. We don't want to say the wrong thing to people because we just can't bear just the physical environment that we're in. What can people do?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that's important is just trying to stay cool. And the ways that we stay cool are by drinking cool things, right? Staying hydrated, doing our best to, if we're not feeling great, if we're having a hard time, go and take a nap. Sometimes taking a nap is a really good way to regulate the temperature, to have a restart. If you have the time, I know that it's hot, it's warm outside, obviously, but where some people really enjoy the cool, some people actually like to be out in the heat, like to be out in the sunshine. Wearing appropriate clothing is always a good idea. Spending time just in leisure in the hot weather, not rushing around, running around in the hot weather, which tends to amplify, the way that we feel and some of those issues that come up. Or we're over functioning and overstimulated and oftentimes overly agitated with everyone around us because of it.
And, one thing that I have found, because I'm doing a lot of things every day, lots of stuff. I'm finding I just have to physically move slower. Like I live in New York City, so we walk around a lot. I'm not walking as fast. I'm taking my time. So therefore I'm giving myself more time to get to a destination. I'm giving myself a little time to cool off if I need to before I engage other people. So that takes some planning.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you get somewhere and you're rushing, even on a not hot day, and you're rushing and then you're like sweating,
Right.
that makes you feel really self-conscious, right? But we're
Yeah,
human beings. So if it's hot outside, we are going to sweat. And
exactly.
so it's like giving yourself grace and giving others grace too.
Absolutely. And if you're rushing, like you said, you're rushing, sweating, not breathing, and physiologically, when you're in this hyperarousal state, it's very difficult to then expect yourself to be calm and to show up well with other people. It's just, it's a very high expectation that one would think they could do all of those things and then show up well.
And when we think about, usually I think in times like this, we're thinking about ourselves. And because we are in relationship with other people, what are things that would help us in relationship to other people in terms of how what compassion we offer to others, what we do as we're interacting with other people, whether it's planned interactions or otherwise?
I think, whenever we are interacting with other people, it's important now. We used to have the golden rule, and the golden rule was that, you treat others the way you would want to be treated. Now we've sort of elevated above that, right? We're in a space where the thought is, when I'm being observant and when I'm understanding the people around me and I'm making it a point to recognize what are things that help them, what are things that, maybe throw them off or harm them, that I'm utilizing the platinum rule, which is that I treat them the way they want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
So if I know I have a coworker who in the morning is kind of a grump, they just kind of are. And, that's okay to have moods, and that's okay to not be your best every moment of every day. Then maybe I might take some time to let them be on their own in the morning. Maybe I don't jump to just hand them whatever assignment they need to do, or maybe I don't jump to talk to them right away. Maybe I give them a little space. If I know that I'm not great until I've had my coffee and I've had a moment, why don't I take that moment and make sure that I'm not jumping in to interact or going in first thing to talk to my boss about something that I know is really pressing, but also in going in is likely going to diminish my mood. I need to really understand that when I have a certain type of energy, oftentimes every interaction I'm having with other people, they're picking up on that energy. They're picking it up. And some people are great about like, hey, my energy is mine and you're not a disruption to that, and it's totally fine. And other people struggle with that quite a bit. So I would say just being mindful consistently of the people around you and using those previous observations that you've had about what works and doesn't work to be caring and offer some level of compassion with people around you.
And I'm going to guess that can feel very difficult to do when you are feeling stress, when you're feeling hot, when you are, you're not at your best.
No.
So trying to think about other people when you're not at your best can be difficult. So maybe that's where we take that breath.
Mm-hmm. Take the breath. And also just remember that I don't have to be perfect in every interaction. I can always, I think that our culture very much lately, and I'm loving the evolution here of we can walk it back. Of we're not, canceling. We're allowing people to grow. We're allowing people to, if they make mistakes and they don't do well at something and they don't handle it well the first time around, they can take accountability and they can walk it back and they can try again. So I think sometimes people get very stressed out. They get very anxious about if I don't approach people around me, or if I don't show up my best with people around me the first time around, it's over for me. And that's just not true. right? We have opportunity to, if we don't show up our best the initial time, we can walk it back and try it again and make apologies and hold ourselves accountable to change.
I love that. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole, and we are talking to Jeanni Johnson about mental health, how we can take care of ourselves during this time when there's just a lot of pressures on many of us. And I wanted to have someone come on who is an expert, who is trained in this area. And I say that because we often go to our friends. Well, what should I do about whatever? And while it's good to have people who love us, it's really good to have people who are trained to help us work through things, think through things, and navigate when we are having serious issues. Love your friends, but they're not the ones who are going to be the best help. So, right, Jeanni?
Absolutely. Not always. There's a place for community-based support for sure. But yeah,
but
sometimes you got to go to the experts.
Let's talk about that. When is the right time to seek professional help?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So, I always say to people, everything in life exists on a spectrum, right? There's a difference between I've got a cold and maybe I've been sick for 2 to 3 days. Maybe I know that that's normal, right? There's nothing that is life threatening, or like my functionality to some degree isn't highly affected by something like that. And then there's something that's bigger, right? There are life threatening things like maybe I can't breathe well, or I'm having heart palpitations, or I'm staying up all night and I just haven't slept for days and days at a time. And anything that is like persistent and continues over time and is worsening to some degree as well is something that we need to get looked at by an expert. So when it comes to mental health, it's okay to have days when you're sad. Totally okay. Totally okay to have days when you're very angry, when you're frustrated, when anxiety is high because you've got something that's coming up, or like a special event or something like this, a talking engagement. It's okay. That is normal. But when things like that persist, so they've lasted for more than 2 weeks at a time, they're worsening, your functionality is in question. So maybe I can't go to work. I haven't been able to get up and bathe myself. I have kids that I need to care for, and I have not been able to do that well. I'm not showing up in my relationship. I'm more isolative. And like I said, we're not sleeping. We're not eating well. Things like that, when they're persistent and they're collective like that, mean no longer is it okay to have those community type supports. We now need to go to, like, community meaning friends and family. Now we need to go to the experts and see what's going on.
And I want to talk about some of the conditions that you mentioned earlier. You talked about anxiety and depression, which a lot of people talk about those things. Sometimes people say, well, I'm depressed or I have anxiety. How do you know if you have that, rather than, like you said, I could just be upset today, which all of us can be upset. What is anxiety and what is depression?
Sure. So anxiety is hyperarousal. It's that feeling that you get where it's as if you can't turn the body off. So I'm consistently sort of activated in an agitated state, where it's very difficult for me sometimes to think. Maybe I'm inside of issues of panic, things that usually I can handle very well and I can talk through very well. I'm having a really difficult time doing that. And depression is where you have protracted sadness, among other symptoms. This country utilizes the DSM-5 to label those ailments. There are diagnostic criteria. So with depression, let's say, for example, you'd have a certain amount of these symptoms. Like, let's say we said sleeplessness or sleeping a lot. So on either end of the spectrum. So either I'm not sleeping at all, so I have what's called insomnia, or I'm sleeping a lot all the time. So that's one of the symptoms, and it would be protracted for 2 weeks or longer. That would be showing up in my life. And then another grouping of symptoms, such as I have sadness that happens every single day, all the time, for several weeks at a time. Like, there's a difference between I'm sad today and it's a really rough day, and I've been sad for 2 weeks and it has not let up at all. I feel awful. That's depression, right? That's a little different. And then other symptoms as well, like maybe I'm isolating myself from others. I feel a sense of hopelessness. Some people might have even worse symptoms, like I want to unalive myself, or I feel and have thought about what it would be like if I were no longer alive. Things like that are where we're veering into depressive symptoms, if that makes sense.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I have a friend who told me that one of her good friends suffers from those feelings, you know, and in recent weeks, months, even years, just her work life has been on a bit of a roller coaster, which only has exacerbated the fact that she already has a tender relationship with life. What do friends do when you know this about your friend is open enough to talk to you about it, but you know, you as a friend, there's so much you can do. What can we do to support our loved ones when they are in those emotionally fragile states?
Absolutely. You know, we can look for the degree to which the experience is happening. So, like I said, there's a difference between a friend coming to you and saying they're really very sad. What your friend is experiencing, where they have thoughts like that they would not want to be here, or they're having a hard time deciding if this life is for them. Those kind of symptoms are the type where we have to be a little bit more pushy about our loved ones seeking care. I would say that we don't wait in those kinds of cases. So,
Okay.
and sometimes what that means, and this is not going to go over great. I'm going to just be honest with you. Sometimes we don't leave the choice up to them to get help any longer. You know, once we as a friend have been given a certain degree of intel about our friends, and we know that they're being honest because we know them, we've known them for years, and they're telling us something that involves their life and their livelihood. That's a high degree, that's a high risk situation. So sometimes, even when they don't want to seek help, it's time for us to take matters into our hands. So sometimes just like getting a wellness check done for someone is really important. You know, there are now.
How do you
Oh,
do that,
sure.
Jeannie? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two, I could differentiate two types. So there's emergent services, right? That's like, I'm going to activate 911. You know, you don't seem safe. You know, maybe we need to go to the emergency room, you know, and that is common nowadays, especially in the Black community, that emergency services are utilized for care. So maybe we need to go to the emergency room.
Let me just ask you this now. How effective is that? Because there are so many things that you're right. In the Black community, many people use the emergency room as the doctor, as
Right.
you know, their go-to. And yet, because it is the emergency room, they're only looking for or treating things that would be emergent, things that would be extreme. Even if you have something else, it's not their responsibility to look for those things. So how effective is using the emergent care for a mental health crisis?
Right. So we wouldn't, because it's crisis, that's the word, right? Because it's crisis, that's what we utilize. Crisis means I can't wait. I can't wait for an appointment, an outpatient appointment. I can't wait for what I do in a private practice. I need care. I need attention right now to help with the crisis. So to bring the crisis down so that then we can take a look at the person later on in a lesser height level of care. So in a way that sees them as they are, maybe more on a normal basis, where crisis means, yes, we do need to many times get treatment from the emergency room. I would recommend anybody who's thinking they want to unalive themselves and has persistent thoughts of that, plans to do that, maybe means to do that. Also like active, lower degree of like active supports in their lives to, yes, seek the emergency room for care. Now, should we be using that habitually? No. What the emergency room offers us is care for the crisis. And then because there was a crisis, it elevates individuals to a system that's in place where the system is like, okay, this person had treatment in the emergency room, so we've got to get them an appointment for care very quickly after that visit. So that's what it really helps with. Like these systems happen in collaboration with one another. So unfortunately, you know, the current status in the world is that the emergency room, when we're in crisis, is the gold standard for care. And then after that, we are able to achieve an appointment that allows for, okay, you're not in crisis, but we do have to get you a plan for how you're going to deal with your life going forward. So, yeah.
And so the second thing that you would recommend, you said the intervention with the emergent care. What would the second one be?
Oh, sure. So it would be non-urgent care. So meaning I would help this person seek out care by an individual therapist. So, or a support group of sorts where I could even go with them. There are groups like NAMI that are all about ensuring that individuals and their families have a place for care, have a place to talk about and understand depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, you name it. And sometimes just like going with a friend, saying like, hey, I know that you haven't been able to do this on your own. I know this has been hard for you, but I'll go with you. I'll support you in this, and let's do this together. Sometimes that can be really very helpful in just turning things around with a friend.
And if your friend decides, I'm not having any of this, I'm not going, I'm not doing it, and you're close and you continue to see this behavior, because it does impact you.
Yeah.
If you see someone who is constantly in a state that is so unstable, you don't know whether they will take their life or not. How and when do you draw the line in terms of how much you interact with them?
I think whenever okay, so this is different for everybody because we all have our own thresholds. And I know this is a very difficult thing to say, but it's a true thing to say. My boundary is not your boundary. It never will be. My threshold, because I'm a clinician, is likely higher, but also because I've had someone who's had various family members who've dealt with mental illness, my threshold may be a lot higher. So maybe to me, I can navigate and I can talk about experiences from so many different vantage points that it doesn't make me uncomfortable if my friend is coming to me with things that are a bit disturbing or a bit on the side of darker. I have a lot of room for that. I have a lot of room for those types of discussions. They don't upset me or bother me. They encourage me to stand closer to them and understand them better. Where that may not be true for you as a friend. Maybe you don't feel comfortable and your worry threshold is just lower. So someone saying to you, I've been depressed for 5 days now. You're like, oh my gosh, what do you mean you've been depressed? I know people have been depressed, and people have been depressed do this, and this, and that. And it's like, well, none of those things are really true. And that person is that person, but you can't really, at this point in your life, you can't stop your mind from going there. So you got to know that about yourself, and you have to decide your threshold. And if it's, you know what, she's called me 3 times this week, that's too high for me. Now I'm worried. Then I have to step in and give that boundary. I have to say, I want to always hear, what you have to say and be able to support you. Unfortunately, some of the things you're talking about, I now don't know how to support you here. This is where I have to draw the line. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the resources. And frankly, I don't have the emotional capacity to manage this. I'm very worried. So my thoughts are, we can do some things together that can get some help for you. I'm happy to show up. I'm happy to be there. And then that would help me to move forward, and that would increase my capacity. If we can't, however, I understand, I respect you, and I love you, but I want you to know I'm going to be checking in on you once or twice a week, but that's as far as I can go.
That's a really beautiful way of saying no. It's how to protect yourself. Yeah. And let your loved one know the truth. You're not abandoning them, but you also have to take care of yourself too. And the question about capacity is so important. A lot of us make the mistake of believing that if I love you, I can help to heal you. And sometimes you can't, because look, many of us go to school, and not that many of us are going to school for that. We may be good at one thing, but that doesn't love doesn't mean that you are an expert at mental health. And I think that's something for many folks to hear. Let me remind you, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We're having a very serious conversation today. It is July, Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're talking with Jeanni Johnson, who is a psychotherapist. And she has a business and private practice where she sees clients who are being brave enough to step up and say, I need some support and I want you to walk this path with me. Therapists do that. There's no shame in this. I think that many more people today are looking to get support in ways that they didn't before. But yet, Jeannie, we looked up the stats, and while there are, well, one thing that we saw suggests that more African Americans in particular suffer from mental health challenges than any other ethnic group, and yet only 10% of us choose to go to therapy.
Absolutely.
Why?
Unfortunately, for various reasons. The first being there is a major stigma related to mental health still, and we are working so hard on it. We're working so hard to make, treatment more accessible, to make treatment something that is the relationship between gaining treatment and looking into self is a positive one. But right now, it's just not. It's seen as weakness within our community, within the Black community. And it is also seen, based on gender. Many times we see that men are not receiving care. And so put Black men in the culture, and then the fact that they are men, they're not seeking help. They're not willing to seek help specifically from professionals. They are just now building their own sort of community supports. I don't know if you're seeing this turn of the tides where men are really showing up for men right now. Black men are really showing up for Black men right now. Please keep doing that, Black men.
Yes.
But it's various reasons. It's that there isn't culturally competent mental health that is available to them. So the mental health services and interventions exist, but they exist in a system that caters to white individuals or other individuals who are not individuals of color. And when services are not tailored to you, they feel cookie cutter or like they're a template. You don't feel like you can relate. You don't feel like you are seen. You don't feel like you are heard. And when you already experience things like being marginalized within the macro perspective, it gets very difficult to then in a micro setting, one-on-one with an individual, to experience them also not seeing you, not paying attention to you, and not tailoring care.
Moments when you are feeling vulnerable. If you want to, the whole idea, I think, when you go to therapy is that you need to let your guard down. You need to share as much as you can, honestly, so that you can work on things. And if you don't feel that you trust that person, it's hard to do that.
I love that you said trust, Harriette. I really love that you said that, because it's not always about someone wanting to do harm, right? Like Black people, people of color don't always come into a setting thinking this person wants to do me harm, but there is harm in not understanding the nuances of a culture. There's a lot of harm in that, because as a professional, I hold a ton of power. I write my notes and I write diagnoses on patients oftentimes. I label symptoms for them. There are things that I have to do, especially I'm not a clinician who utilizes insurances or things like that, but there are clinicians who do. And there's a certain diagnostic criteria that comes with that you have to use. And those things stick with people. Once they go in a legal record, it's a binding record. So if someone misinterprets you scratching your head or hitting your head like this, because your head's itching, right? If I do this as a Black woman, you're like, oh, her head's itching. She doesn't want to mess up her hair. You know it. You smile because you know, right? You know I'm scratching my head. You're like, oh, she just got she don't want to mess up her hair. If a person who is a professional sees me harming myself, they might write in a record.
She's banging her head.
Yes, banging her head, hurting her head. So now we have a symptom of self-harm that's in a record. And I say this not because it's something that's far-fetched. It happens all the time, unfortunately.
The cultural
nuances are important, and being able to recognize those cultural nuances is highly important. So when we don't have culturally competent care, people notice. People of color notice, and they don't want to be having to explain to you their pain and the issues that exist within their world while they are in copious amounts of pain. It's exhausting.
That is an incredibly important point. And while there are more and more people of color entering the field of therapy, there aren't enough yet. And so it's it's important for people to understand that and hopefully choose that field, those who are figuring out their lives. I want to address something that you just mentioned, that while it is not true for you, like you are in a private practice that does not work with insurances. Honestly, that is one of the challenges that I think a lot of people find. Some of the so-called best therapists and psychiatrists, et cetera, even just regular doctors, are no longer allowing themselves to be in the system of insurance because it's such a racket. Sorry.
It
And
is.
but what happens, and then even the ones who do, a lot of insurances don't cover mental health, or they cover it so marginally that it's you can't afford it. So for people who cannot afford to pay for a therapist of whatever kind, what is offered? I mean, I know it's not what you do specifically, but I know that where can people go if they want to have ongoing care, but they do need the support of insurance or some other kind of affordable option?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's not that they can't see individuals in private practice or who don't take insurances. I often recommend for individuals to, alongside of their regular insurance that they have, to do their best to also sign up for supplementary care or supplementary funding. So, like, there are FSAs, which is it's like a little savings account essentially that you can utilize alongside enacting insurance, or an HSA is sometimes something that is used in other parts of the world. FSA is relevant to New York. And so those are like little fund accounts that you would initiate if you're getting health insurance through your work, and they allow for you to save, $750, $1,000, that it's like taken out in small part in your from your paycheck each month, or every 2 weeks, whenever you're getting your paycheck. And so when you have that, you can pay for your services, or let's say the insurance covers up to 70%. But like me, I'm an out of network provider. So they would pay up to 70%. The other 30% you could use from the FSA. So it would be like having cash on hand that you use towards healthcare. I always recommend people do this and enact that, because it's really important to ensuring that you get the kind of care you deserve. And even if your insurance pays zero on that, you can pay out of pocket with that FSA. It's really a very helpful tool. Yeah.
And then also, I believe, tell me if this is true, I believe that there are teaching hospitals and other health organizations that offer highly discounted services, and the people are competent. They're competent, but they're part of an institution where it is set up to be more affordable. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. And you get the added regard that sometimes those are teaching hospitals. So you have newer young professionals coming in, many times newer, younger professionals of color coming in to learn and grow. And if you feel comfortable having them around, they often will allow for that. And it again perpetuates this cycle of, we're changing the system, we're making things more readily available. There's also something that is called a sliding scale that we can bill on in my practice, but because I want to give back. And I always feel that it's important that people get care, whether they can afford it or not. What I can afford for myself, being someone who's a successful person, is I have 2 slots for sliding scale. So I can change the amount that I usually will bill a client. So I generally will bill $200 a session, but I don't do that with a client who has lesser money. So maybe there's a client who has applied and said, hey, I need some help. I want to see you. And what I have based on my income is I can pay $50 a session. I would accept that $50 a session, and everything else would be covered personally by me. So I have 2 slots that are like that in my practice. Many clinicians, many clinicians, just like lawyers who do pro bono work and things like that, they will take on clients and they will help clients through for a lesser charge. Sometimes it's even $0.
And I think it's important. Thank you for explaining that, because it's so confusing. Like, if you don't understand it, a lot of times people just say, I can't do it, and they shut the door before it's even open. So I appreciate your giving us a full spectrum of that. I think the bottom line is, if you feel like you need help, get it. Find help in whatever way you can, because we want to be able to wake up tomorrow and have a chance to explore our dreams and figure out, what is my purpose on the planet? What am I supposed to be doing now? And so another question I have before, in the few minutes that we have left, a lot of people who tune in to Dream Leapers and who are my clients are in transition. They did do this or that, and they either are literally in transition, not doing that, but not yet doing something else, or they are hoping to transition out of something. And that I find to be a very stressful place to be in, when you're not sure what's next. And what can you say to people who find themselves in that situation to help them have the confidence to move forward, even when, they don't know what's behind the next door?
Yeah. I always encourage them, any person who's transitioning, to envision consistently the person that they want to be. It's very difficult sometimes to sit in the unknowing, sit in the unknown space, and we want to fill it with all of these new ideas and bright ideas, and we want to fill it with all this confidence that something on the external is going to change the way we see ourselves. But what you have in the moments where you're transitioning, the best thing you have, the highest tool that you have in your toolbox, is that tool of introspection, and that tool of really taking time out to recognize where you used to be and who you want to be. And when you do that, when you take a look at those two people, you can start to throw out old things, throw out old habits, start working towards newer habits and new ways of speaking, and really enact in the moments in the transition how you would behave and how you would show up in the new role. So let's say I'm transitioning from someone who was, C-suite, super busy all the time. I had to make decisions very, very quickly. And we know Black women, people of color as a whole, in those types of positions tend to perform at very, very high levels, and their stress levels are really high. And then you decide, I don't want that anymore. I want a life that's a little bit, that consists of leisure. I want a life that consists of me being able to be much more pensive and dedicated to sitting and thinking about my change before I make these kinds of shifts. You have to actively be enacting that in your life in order to make that transition. Otherwise, you will continue to make decisions in the same way you were making decisions prior to the transition. So I always say to people, act as if you're already that person that you're looking to be. So start with ease. When you order, don't rush to order your food when you're out. Take your time. Gloss over the menu. Maybe ask them really nice questions of the waiter, hey, what do you think is good? What would you want to eat? Slow it down. Act as if you're
Slow it
down.
Are you all listening? Slow it down. That is one of the hardest things to do, Jeannie, is to slow it down, because in our culture, we're taught to, especially for people of color, we're taught you have to be 10 times as good in order to be even in the game. And so just a last thought about being who you are in your culture, especially a lot of my audience is African-American, a lot African-American female. We certainly feel like we have to do more in order to just be okay. What can you tell us that will help us to relax a little bit?
Okay, so this one's going to be big, because I have a workshop coming up actually about some of this stuff.
Good.
So the biggest thing is that we often identify with the parts of our culture that start from behind, the parts of our culture that are really very painful and that perpetuate that idea that we have to be these self-starting, perfectionistic, work 10 times as hard as you said type of individuals, right? We identify with that part of our culture, that grind culture, that grit culture. And I get it. It's moved us very far. It's been really beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah. But what we neglect is the parts of our culture that were crafty and that lived in ease and that lived in joy. Those songs that we're saying, right? That collective celebration that we had with each other, where we're really truly seeing each other. And we need to be inviting that into those spaces and remembering, oh, wait, my ancestors made time for joy. I know they did, because they were in so much pain and they were in so much grief. If they didn't make time for joy, they wouldn't have survived. That's right. My grandmother made time for joy. My mother made time for peace. I know that she made time for peace because on Sundays she played music that was beautiful and she calmed us all and she made sure we were together and she made sure that I was seen and I was loved and I was heard. I know that these things happen. We need to identify the parts of our culture that are about ease, that are about joy, that are about elevating in the context of utilizing both those tools versus all of the pain and all of the grit and all of the grinding. That's what I would say.
I love that. Choose peace and joy. Thank you, Jeanni Johnson. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise to us. I feel calmer now. I hope other folks do too. We have to really practice the breathing and relaxing and not feeling like we have to do everything for everyone. So I do thank you for your reminders and your wisdom. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate this so much.
You too. Thank you all for tuning in to Dream Leapers. And until next time, have a great day and make it count.